Uh, this brings us to our speaker, and it's my pleasure to introduce Carter from Las Vegas. I'm excited to hear your story, Carter. Come on. Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. And my name is Carter Singh. I'm very grateful, recovered alcoholic. And page 90 tells me that we should introduce ourselves to the newcomer as a person who has recovered. And then my whole life, my whole recovery journey revolves around newcomers if I am to maintain this new way of life. And page 100 tells me that both me and the new guy, both you and the new man must walk day by day on the path of spiritual progress. If we persist, remarkable things will happen. And when I've done that, and when I look back, I've realized that the things that came to me when I put myself in God's hands were better than anything I could have planned on my own. So thank you, God. Whatever you want to achieve here today, speak through me. Thank you for making me an instrument of your peace, and in all things your will, not mine, be done. The last time I drank was June 25th, 2018. First time I drank, I was 12 years old, and at that point, I wanted to die. I felt like I had a hole in my soul, and a lot of things happened in my childhood where, I don't know, I come from a family of alcoholics, abandonment, humiliation, belittlement, devaluing. My first mom, she laid me down for a nap and turned on the gas and left. And I don't think that had any effect on me until a few years later. My stepmom, she told me one time, she said, I'm not your mother. I'm not your mommy, because I was like 6, 7 years old. She said, I'm not your mommy. Your real mommy tried to kill you, and you're going to meet her today, so go put on something nice. And, from that moment, I started creating this feeling of, well, I'm going through EMDR therapy, and the therapist said, what do you see when you see that image? I say, I see a flawed and defective kid. She said, do you see your birth mother or your stepmom? I'm like, I don't see either one. I feel flawed and defective and a child that's unacceptable to the rest of humanity, And I had a childhood that was really good on paper, and from a family that shames and is shameless, and that's just the way it is. We worked hard, and I've been working since I was 7 on summer vacations, and I've been working since 11 because I realized that I could get out of the house that way, and I worked 3 jobs till the time I was 4 years old. Served my country, was in the Navy. I drank from 16 to 26. First time I drank was 12, and I got invited to the drive-in movie theater by some older kids, and in high school, 12th graders or whatever, they could drive. And I was in 7th grade. They handed me a bottle of Southern Comfort. It was a 5th, and I never gave it back. It fixed me immediately, and I loved that experience. I had like a 5-day hangover. Then I was trying to plan, okay, don't drink Southern Comfort. And that's kind of what happened. And it wasn't about not drinking. It ever was until, first time I did, I'm going to talk about this. And first time I did meth, I figured out a way to stay awake for 30 days. And I was like, oh, that's probably too much. Maybe do 3 weeks. So everything was excessive for me. And that's just kind of the way it went. When I was in the Navy, I joined the Navy at 22, 23. And within a year or so, they're like, hey, you got a problem with that. And so I knew that. I just needed somebody to tell me. And so I didn't know what was wrong with me. My first sponsor handed me a big book and a box of chocolate bars, and he said, here, read this when you go to the bathroom, which my head was too busy. I didn't understand it. And then whenever you feel like drinking, eat a chocolate bar. When you run out, go buy some ice cream. And I did that for 13 months until I was suicidal. I couldn't stand one more day in my skin. And I went to my division chief and I said, will I get in trouble if you send me to rehab? He's like, I don't think so. Can I go see the skipper? And so I went to go see the captain that day, and then I was like, I need to go to rehab, or can you please send me to rehab? And they sent me to Rhode Island, Newport, Rhode Island, the Naval Hospital over there. That day I was on a bus, and thank God I met my second sponsor, who he met me in the first day or two. Another Mike out there, God bless you, Mike. And he gave me a shoebox full of Joe and Charlie cassettes, and he said, go through this, and I'll be back in 5 days. Take notes, do this, do that, and it was phenomenal. I couldn't sleep, and I went through Joe and Charlie, and I was like, oh, everything was finally. I was balancing Joe and Charlie with the big book, and he took me through the steps, and I had a beautiful white light experience, and when on the fifth step, he's called me a puppy, and here had been carrying around this box of rocks for so long, and I went back to my home group in South Boston. Is a motorcycle group, Abington in the Wind, and I don't know anybody going through the book, so I thought I had a special treatment, and never opened the book again. I wouldn't help another alcoholic ever, for a while anyway, and I saw be of service, so I volunteered. I was a guardian angel in New York City and Boston and Manchester, New Hampshire, and I did things that really built my ego. Vietnam Memorial Moving Wall, junior achievement. I taught kids, and all that stuff fed my ego, and my ego rebuilt itself. And, I started doing the same things that I'd always done, just not drinking. And was restless, irritable, discontent, trouble with relationships. I couldn't control my emotional natures, was a prey to misery and depression. All those things, full of fear, couldn't make a living. And I would stay sober 14 years. I thought about my relapse for 2 years, trying to plan that, didn't do any good. And I would have 1 year 6 times. And, I came to the point again of I had suicidal ideations for, basically 40 years of my life. I never did have peace of mind. I toggled between excitement, anxiety, and depression, and I didn't know any other feelings. And, drinking or dry, sober, that was it. And been abandoning my children, running. I suffered from a deep-seated toxic shame and incompleteness, unreliability, running, silence, all these behaviors was me, and so I came to the point that I had to surrender. And I was, here in Las Vegas in a room at Siegel Suites with my son in the next room with a gun in my chest. And I heard God say, you never did give this a chance, or you never did give AA a chance, and trust God, clean house, and help others. And I'm like, oh, I never did that. I got up, I had kind of a spiritual experience, went and told my son, I said, I got a problem and I'm going to AA. And I sat him down. It wasn't that fast, but I talked to him. And then I was off. I joined them. I ended up at the Las Vegas Men's Cartel. And it's one of my home group. And I would go on a beautiful journey. And I have sponsors. My sponsor is Yale Sage out of Dallas. His sponsor is Myers Raymer and Chris Raymer. And the primary purpose group is really important in my sobriety. I have some, I have really a castle of men around me of 6 to 7, men with long-term sobriety. Each offered me something different, and then I built circles and circles of men around me over the last 5 years, 5 or plus years, and started sponsoring people after 4 months in this program. I just jumped in with both feet, and I didn't want anything in my house, not TV, not anything. I haven't watched the news for 5 years. Really doesn't need my opinion anymore to run. And I was amazed that that was true. And, it's still, they're still doing the same thing. And my impact, it wasn't that much, you know what I mean? So I'm good with that. And I've had the beautiful honor and opportunity to sponsor men and women and take about 250 people through the step in the last 5 years. It's just a big deal. You know, this program has changed my life. And so thanks again for inviting me, and welcome to those people that are new in sobriety. And I think this could be a magical journey when we embrace our pain. That's my experience. And I realized that, I was told that I needed to become a great seeker. So, one of the things that I read a lot of Bill's stuff, and I think in 1961, he told us that our chief responsibility is an adequate presentation of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous to the newcomer. And page 77 tells me that my real purpose is to fit myself to be of maximum service to God and the people about me. And my current life is built on and continues to evolve around this philosophy. And I'm grateful today to be reminded that, in this process for me, we're trying to get somewhere. My problem is conscious separation from source. And the solution, conscious contact, with source. And the question is, someone told me to treat this book like the big book, like Mythbusters. So what do I need to create and experience in my program in order to get there? And the answer is a shift in consciousness. And, realizing that we need a shift in consciousness, I never did that before, in order to receive our daily reprieve from pain and suffering, which is big. After going through the big book hundreds of times, I think the big book has a spirit to it, and it tells you things that, that you can only experience after going through it more and more and more time. And I'm trying to experience what it's like to journey farther away from my false sense of self and closer to my authentic self, which is completely and harmoniously connected to God, a God of my understanding. And so how do I do that? And how many meetings do I have to attend to find that experience? And 0 on that. And if I had to get there, then I have to create I have to get through a 10th, 11th, and 12th step experience, which is really for me is to understand the basics of sobriety and recovery. And I went back to Joe and Charlie and listened to them hundreds of times, and it just continued. And I continue to do book studies all the time and I just continue to study the big book and learn and teach. And Joe and Charlie, teaches us that steps 1 and 2 are conclusions of the mind. They're not working steps. And in my experience, what I see, we lose a lot of members here because they're forced to do, things that make them lose willingness. I used to see it in my other home group, and I saw 25 of my friends really hang themselves, and just because they didn't do the steps, or they went through the steps too slow and they never got it. And like making them read the doctor's opinion for a month. But having come in in absolute defeat and being taught to qualify myself, and that's what the book says. I'm grateful that I had that experience from a sponsor that was knowledgeable to do that with me. There's 50 references or 45 or 50 references to read this book. It constantly refers to us to read this book, and I'm grateful that that my second sponsor made me go through the books. I knew what I was going to do, and I was really willing to do that because I experienced absolute defeat. And absolute defeat, what I learned is the first necessary ingredient for long-term sobriety. For me to be continually convinced to my innermost self that I'm screwed on my own power, you know, and before I learned, I lost a lot of people in step 2. And the book says our problem is delusion. On page 30 and 63, it is the first 3 delusions. And, you know, Carl Jung was trying to teach us that we believe what we think and we act on it. And it's the terrible dilemma of us humans, which he is talking about on page 27 and 28 with Roland Hazard. And then basically, I was baptized 4 times, and, you know, I couldn't get it. But Carl Jung shed a lot of light, because he basically said, you know, believing in God does not give you access to God, and we need access. And this book is amazing in my experience, having gone through it and gone through it and gone through it. You know, I think for me in step 2 is like, step 2 says came to believe, it doesn't say stop and believe. And so I just let it fly. I'm like, it's not me, and I need God. And it doesn't say stop and define or anything like that. So I never did that. You know, and my God isn't a rock or a doorknob, because it's really this energetic power that I need. And I think people get misguided on that. That's my opinion, you know, from well-intentioned sponsors who don't understand step 2. You know, I think Chris Raymer and Myers Raymer, he taught me, you know, just, hey, do you got a problem with God? No. All right, let's get going. If it's yes, then keep drinking, because we're not salespeople, you know. And that really resonated with me. My job is to help, you know, guide people through a process that helps them tap into our, you know, God-guided intuition, and which lies within our soul and deep down in every man, woman, and child. And for me, when I tapped into that and realizing that my soul knows everything that it needs for its reconciliation, and that's what my journey's been. My soul's been on a journey of reconciliation and straightening out the karmic by the helping of other people and the healing of my, you know, of my past. You know, my role as a sponsor, I sponsor so many people, and it's an honor. But it's not to tell them what to do. You know, I'm beyond human aid, and, you know, I don't know what your soul needs for healing. It's got to come from higher power and source. And it will be revealed down the road, it says, as we work the process and the process unfolds. And that's my experience. You know, King David was so great. And he said, Psalm 23, he said, though I walk through the valley, and this is my interpretation for me, you know, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear my ego, for the fundamental presence of God lies deep within me. And we got to walk and sell out to the process, just like it's business or anything else. We got to sell out to the process. And that's my experience. I did it without I just didn't want to be me. I literally hated every part of myself. I really did. You know, I had this deep need of validation. I was a cheater for most of my life. I had this huge need for validation, and I couldn't go 2 years without, you know, destroying and spontaneously contaminating my relationships. And I got sick of my life being like that and hurting everybody in my life. And I'd run from everything. I couldn't handle anything. I mean, like I had my shame spirals were just to take off running. Even if things were going good, I'd be like, it's time for me to go. So in order for me to change, I bumped into this old timer at a convention in my first year, and I said, "How do you build a relationship with God?" And he reached into his lapel and he handed me this card, said, "Read, write, pray, meditate, and then go teach or guide or, you know, sponsor." And that step 3 is really a physical process. It's not, when we limit step 3 to a prayer, we take the effect of the process out. And step 3 is really the first part where a sponsorship comes in play, and we really begin to make this process physical. And Joe and Charlie taught me probably the most important thing ever, because I probably listened to him 50 times, or I don't know how many times, but it took me a couple months of listening to him before I heard it. And I cycled through that 16-hour program, every couple days. And they said, make a commitment out of the third step. And I was like, oh. And I think Joe says, make a commitment to turn my thoughts and actions over to the care of God as I experience him. And what is my experience going to be today? And for me, I could do that because, I made a lot of decisions in my life that didn't go anywhere. And so what does that look like? And combined with the old man's card that said read, write, pray, meditate, or really pray, meditate, read, and write, teach, I need to get launched into a process which consists of steps 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 on a daily basis. And so my first thought and my behavior and the way I've lived my life is just like it says, prayer. For me, it took a lot of times going through the big book when things would have an impact on me. I got to read it like 100 times. And as I grow and work with others, it has a greater impact. And I don't think you can have that impact until you actually put this program into work. And so the impact that Dr. Silkworth had on his last sentence to us, he combined with, he reportedly treated over 55,000 alcohol and heroin addicts, 55,000. Dr. Bob was like, 5,000 or 15,000? I can't remember. Dr. Bob was 3 a day for 15 years. So, and that's 55,000 people. And the last thing that Dr. Silkworth wanted us to know was, I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through. And though you may scoff, you may remain to pray. But we got to get through our delusion and my thinking and all that stuff. And so that can make an impact. Prayer has changed my life and my journey. And going through the big book, a lot of times, there's 32 prayers in the book, which I pulled out of there, and all designed to drive inventory and the continued looking at myself, Step 10 in the continued inventory means that I'm continuously willing to do whatever it takes to continue my awakening, which is healing, which is enlightenment, which is to make amends, and which is ultimately forgiveness. And for me, the process of coming to AA started with absolute defeat. And I learned that it leads to surrender, which then leads me to equality. I need to feel equal with other people because I live in a self-righteous, judgmental, resentful, contemptuous, emotional-driven system. And when I feel equal to you, those things begin to disappear, and I open the door to acceptance. And acceptance is the key and necessary ingredient for forgiveness for me, And I pulled out some prayers and made my own prayers. My prayers about 25, 30 minutes long every morning, and then I go into meditation. And some of mine is, God help me forgive myself for making mistakes and to forgive others that make mistakes. Let no harm come to any person, place, or thing through me. And when I live in forgiveness, I live in healing. And for me, this is what this book is trying to teach us. When it says this thought brings us to step 10, what is the thought? And I heard Mark Houston talk, and he said, the thought is amends, inventory, forgiveness, and the clearing away of things that block us, it says on page 64. And because our first inventory is rarely enough, it says on 72, we put our finger on the weak items. We've ascertained in a rough way what the problem is. I need to do a lot more inventories. To this date, I've done like 950 inventories. I do one every couple of days, and it's turned into a beautiful love letter to God, because for me, I was taught by one of my mentors early on that, sobriety is about preparation. Preparation is the key. And Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a great spiritual leader, he wrote 80 books. He says, an hour of discomfort, if you will, in the morning leads to like 12 hours of love and tolerance. He says, if you don't have a shift in consciousness, we're going to live in pain and suffering because it's just the human way. And for us, it's a bit more excessive. And so for me, in step 3, it says, though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it will have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. And my liquor was but a symptom. And when that really, the impact of that was like, oh, well, if alcohol is not my problem, what's my problem, And by the way, this guy Rumi 1,000 years ago said, our task is not to seek God. Our task is merely to seek to clear away the things that block us from God. And to me, where the book says in 66, we turn back to the list where it held the key to the future. What part of our future? My entire future depends on me making a continued list. And it says I'm completely prepared to see things I'm prepared to see things from an entirely different angle. And so my job as a seeker, as the book tells us, we sought, is to, for me, is understand the big book and see things from from different spiritual practices that allow me to see the same thing in a different way. And as I do that, I begin to heal, and I begin to understand and seek deeper. I think I've had 1,000 step 1 experiences too, which is if booze isn't my problem, or drugs, or food, or eating, or sex, or cutting, or anger, or social media is not my problem, then what's my problem? I'm codependent is what I found out. I'm codependent first on my false sense of self. It happened really young when there's a rupture of trust. Then I become more spiritually sick as time goes on, and I become incredibly more dependent on other people to get my power from. And then when I don't get my power from them and they don't validate me, I get angry, I get depressed, I'm a victim of the delusion that I could wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if I only manage well, and that never goes away because, people feel my energy and it's forceful. I lack harmony, I'm manipulative, and what does that do? It makes people want to snatch all they can out of life, and then, I feel like life isn't treating me right. And so when that came to enlightenment or to light and to understand that, I really felt responsible for my life, and I felt responsible to be a good AA, and I felt responsible, to my sobriety requires a lot of payment, and so I still take 4 to 6 people through the steps every month. I'm constantly doing that, and it's imperfect. I'm not a perfect AA. I just do the work, and I'm not saying I'm the best sponsor ever. I'm not even trying to compete with that. I just do the work. And, in my disease, what came to light for me is that I lacked the deep understanding of unconditional love. And in my family system, the only thing I know is conditional love, humiliation, belittling, devaluing, shamelessness, abandonment, teasing, overgiving. And some of the biggest things in understanding shamelessness is living with parents who, God bless them, they don't know. Being a parent is the toughest job there is. So, forgiveness and it has been passed on since Adam. So, but not showing that they can make a mistake. I lived in a family where that wasn't even remotely a thing. So for me as a child, I'm flawed and defective. I have no recourse for the mistakes that I make, and I begin to destroy my self-esteem on my own, on my own energy, combined with the energy of others around me. And in the 2nd and 3rd edition, in the last story of He Who Loses His Life, E.B.R. Bob, he wrote one of the greatest things ever. He wrote, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, there are 2 sins: interfering with the growth of another human being and interfering with one's own growth. And there's one law, the law of love. And I don't know what love is. I mean, every time I'm in a relationship, before recovery, it's my ideal of what I think a woman should be, and that never works out. So I never love anybody truly for who they are. I'm with sick people that is also codependent, and we end up in conflict, and that never works out. That's my history of relationships. And I realized what an ideal was. An ideal for me is that I have this picture of what I think something should be before I actually experience what it is, whether it's, this, that, a human, a person, or whatever. And when Carl Jung was talking about on page 27, the ideals and ideas, emotions, and attitude, which were once the driving force of these men, were suddenly cast to one side, and a new set of motives and conceptions began to dominate them. And so, I'm obsessed with tying my emotions to everything I think and feel, and it doesn't work out right. And so, the law of love is what every spiritual practice and religion ultimately is trying to teach us. And since I was driven in here, and I'm driven by the need for validation, by 100 forms of fear, 100 forms of self-delusion, 100 forms of self-seeking, 100 forms of self-pity. And in my woundedness, I've only known taking. And when I misperceive the actions of others and the circumstances of this third dimension, I'm a victim. So, the question for me really was back to the old man, what do I do? Read or pray, meditate, read, write, and then teach. And that's been, my program through the Big Book, which is, pray for the purpose of driving more discovery of my false sense of self in order to find out who I am, my authentic self, which I don't know any part of that. I never knew who I was authentically. But I must first journey through who I'm not. And it's a really important journey, and that's why I'm so grateful to found out that I'm alcoholic. I love having an affliction because it's got me here, and I don't know if I'd ever get here. And, so some of the prayers that God, please, in every day that I do, and then I write them down, and I pause enough to write these things down. And, Mark Houston, I heard him say that it took him 17 and a half years to make amends and clear things up. And I understand, because as I began to do that every day, amazing things popped up. I'd say, God, please show me anything that is preventing me from fulfilling my primary purpose. God, please have the world and the people in it treat me tomorrow exactly as I treated it and them today. And God, please help me to practice these principles in all my affairs, regardless of the personal consequence to me. Even if it makes me look stupid, even if it costs money, it just doesn't matter. Please help me to stay as willing as I was when I was absolutely defeated when I first came to you. And God, thank you for helping me practice these principles in all my affairs. And thank you for giving me the power to carry them out and help me succeed at living by them. And God, help me to be okay today with making mistakes and to forgive others that make mistakes, especially my family. And above all things, thank you for removing my selfishness and self-centeredness, dishonest and inconsiderate behavior today. Thank you, God, for helping me carry this message to anybody that you want me to today, and teach me, Father, to be prudent and silent when it's not the time. And that's a big part of my own prayers daily. And you can find all these prayers in the Big Book. And, the more we seek, for me, the more is revealed to me. And what is revealed, the book says, is more of our true and authentic self. And I love myself today. I love my life today. And because I pretended to be someone else most of my life. I mean, like I was constantly trying to be the idea of the man I thought you wanted me to be, or whatever. I didn't know who I was. And I would flip on a coin to something else. I had no idea. I was a lost soul. I've lived a double life, And page 28 says that I need to seek with the desperation of a drowning man to get out of the terrible dilemma of my thoughts, which looks like, I bound the way I feel with my ideals, emotions, and attitudes. And I'm incorrect 98% of the time. So I need to seek, read, to see life, the universe from a different angle, and write an inventory with gratitude and show love to the God that I want to have an experience with. And I've done that 967 times. I need to meditate to heal memories, because memories is where fear comes from. It's where our karma is stored. It's where our desires come from. And where we're wounded, many are unhealthy desires. Thich Nhat Hanh says we got two minds, the store consciousness and mind consciousness. And our trauma and everything else is in our store consciousness. And the place we're trying to get is a shift to the other mind. And that's the amazing journey that our founders helped us get to, that I've no doubt God had his hand in. And man, I'm grateful. I hated who I was, and I hated that guy. And I spent a lot of time with Deepak Chopra in the last 5 years, and he's the world's most recognized spiritual leader and neurosurgeon. And he teaches us that there's only one secret to enlightenment, and that is healing. And there's only one secret to healing, and that is enlightenment. And, in my perspective, we live in the greatest time in AA. We have the ability to compress time frames with all the wisdom of recovery and healing and social media. We can listen to Sandy Beach and Mark Houston and all these great people and do book studies. And, one of my mentors told me in 1957, he told me to read Language of the Heart. He said, page 233. And Bill wrote in December 57, he wrote The Greatest Gift of All. And he said, 547, the greatest gift that could come to anybody is a spiritual awakening. Without doubt, this would be the certain verdict of every well-recovered alcoholic in AA's entire fellowship. So then, what is this spiritual awakening, this transforming experience? How can we receive it, and what does it do? Well, to begin with, the spiritual awakening is our means of finding sobriety. And to us, of AA, sobriety means life itself. We know that a spiritual experience is the key to survival from alcoholism, and that for most of us, it is the only key. We must awake or we die. So we do awake, and we are sober. Then what? Is sobriety all that we are to expect of a spiritual awakening? Again, the voice of AA speaks up. No, sobriety is only a bare beginning. It is only the first gift of the first awakening. If more gifts are to be received, our awakening has to go on. And if it does go on, we find that bit by bit, we can discard the old life, the one that did not work, for a new life that can and does work under any conditions whatever, regardless of worldly success or failure, regardless of pain or joy, regardless of sickness or health, or even of death itself. A new life of endless possibilities can be lived if we are willing to continue our awakening. That's my experience. And, over this time, I've had over 1,000 white light experiences with taking so many people through the steps and having this process that was gifted to me. And then being just seeking, really seeking to heal, not to be good at anything. I just don't want to destroy anybody's life anymore. And it's turned me into a great seeker because, I've damaged so many good people, and I don't do that anymore. I stayed away from sex my first year, then I turned into 18 months, then 2 years, and I started dating without sex, and I started working on the spirit, and I started behaving differently, and I started doing things differently as I took people through the steps that I read, and I did more and more inventories. I realized one day, I think after like 132 letters to God, that I was loved. And I realized I didn't need validation from anybody else anymore. And I would still need to heal those things. And on and on and on, hundreds of them. And, and then I realized, Dr. Bradshaw he's this great guy in the 80s. He's an alcoholic, and he wrote some books that are really important to our recovery. You know, they continue to find out a lot of things. And in December of January 1958, Bill wrote The Next Frontier, Emotional Sobriety. And I'm just going to read a portion of that. He said, I think, because he was trying to figure out the need for validation and toxic shame and these things, and put this into perspective. And Bill's greatest gift to me was his need for validation and his honesty about that. I think many old timers put AA to severe but successful tests, still find they often lack emotional sobriety. Perhaps they will be the spearhead for the next major development in AA, the development of much more real maturity and balance, which is to say humility in our relations with ourselves, with our fellows, and with God. And those adolescent urges that so many of us have for top approval, perfect security, and perfect romance. And you know, he's talking about grandiosity, romanticism, magical thinking, melancholy, overachieving, underachieving, justice seeking, you know, victimhood. And he wrote about that, and all the stories and all the big books, you could pick it out. You know, having read through those things, there's like 9 major problems of the alcoholic. And then later on, you know, Bradshaw would write about all these things. And yeah, I've been through and done a lot of, in addition to AA, I just continue with healing. And healing the shame that binds you, homecoming, healing my inner wounded child, EMDR therapy, all these things. And Bill said on page 88, there's a lot of good books out there, and, you know, go see therapists where you need to. And my journey has been magical. It's been amazing. And I'm just really grateful, you know. And before I go, I truly wish to thank you for this opportunity and being a part of your journey. And thank you for having me tonight. And, you know, that's all I got. I hope that was all right.